One of the jobs our brain does for us is that it processes information. So everything that we experience over the course of a day, everything that we hear, everything that we see, everything that we feel, our brain takes it in, sorts it, shifts through it, and decides what to do with it. You know, is it something important that I need to keep for learning, safety, survival? And if it is, it makes a memory, consolidates it, and links it in with similar information that's already stored in your brain. If it's stuff that your brain decides it's not really necessary to keep, it just gets deleted. So take a minute and just kind of be aware of all the sensory information that's coming in to you now. You know, there's visual information. You see me standing up here, the information on the slide. Auditory information, the sound of my voice, maybe the sound of paper shuffling or pens writing. Maybe, you know, olfactory information. Maybe the person next to you has perfume or cologne. Maybe there's a sense of it being cold in here or hot. The sensation of the chair supporting your body. So none of that really supports you in any way, shape, or form, right? There's nothing that helps your survival to remember what this chair feels like underneath your body. And so most of the information that comes in, our brain just deletes it because it's not important for us to remember. And for the brain, emotion is just another form of data. Even disturbing emotion just gets processed like any other piece of information coming into us. So let me give you an example of that. A few years ago, I had a car accident, and I was driving to work, and I was coming out of the main road from my subdivision and turning left onto the main road. And as I was turning left, I didn't see a car, and so I caused this accident. And what was particularly upsetting to me was that the car I hit had a small child in it. And when I see this kind of grandmotherly woman pulling this screaming child out of the back of the car, I was like, you know, so the thought that I had caused an accident that could have potentially hurt this child was really awful for me. And so after the accident, I avoided that intersection if at all possible. And when I did have to go through the intersection, my anxiety was really high. You know, I could feel my heart beating, my palms were sweaty, my stomach was queasy. But gradually over time, the anxiety went away. You know, I was on my way to work, and so I had to call work and say, look, I'm going to be late. So people there at work knew about it, and so many people asked me, what happened? Are you okay? So I talked about it several times. I had to talk about it to the insurance people. I had to talk about it, you know, with my family. So over time, the anxiety went away. And now I still go through that intersection every day. Sometimes on the weekends, if I'm out and about, I go through it multiple times a day. And rarely ever does the memory of that accident come up. And so what that means is that my brain processed this incident, right? Even the disturbing aspects of it are gone for me. And so what this tells us is the brain is programmed to heal. You know, just like our bodies are programmed to heal, our brains function in the same way. So surgeons and doctors are able to do these really invasive procedures on people because they rely on the body's ability to heal. And our brains are oriented in the same way. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about types of memory. And neurologists refer to two layers of information that become memory. So we have explicit information, which is facts, general knowledge, autobiographical information. It places us in space and time. It provides context to all of our experiences. Implicit information are our emotional responses, body sensations, reflexive actions, absent from that without any of that contextual information, okay? And what's important to remember about these these two layers of information is that it takes the consolidation of both of these for there to be an integrated memory. And they follow different neurological pathways. And they follow those different neurological pathways until the entire experience is consolidated into one memory. Okay. So here's a picture of our brain. So when we talk about memory formation and information processing, The structures of the brain that we're primarily interested in are the thalamus, our prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. And so our interest in the thalamus is because it acts as the relay station between our higher cortical centers and the lower limbic centers. And the thalamus is the first structure in the brain that receives all the incoming raw sensory data that we experience. And it does the first level of sorting. And it sends explicit information to the hippocampus and the implicit information to the amygdala. In our prefrontal cortex, you guys probably know this is our center for higher reasoning and executive function, right? It gives us the ability to make clear and rational decisions, gives us the ability to observe and to be mindful, and it also gives us the ability to know and predict. And that's because it has access to the stores of processed, categorized information that we've accumulated over a lifetime of experiences. So even though I've never been to one of the brown bag things at Clarity Guidance, I kind of had a sense of what it would look like in here, that I would be standing up in front, there would be some kind of screen, and there would be all these chairs in front of me. And that's based on my experiences at other workshops and conferences. Our prefrontal cortex also balances our emotional responses. It takes the information from our limbic brain and says, okay, here's what we know. There may be no reason for us to react emotionally. So if I'm at work and my boss is yelling at me, my prefrontal cortex knows, okay, this is not my father who used to yell at me like that. He can't hurt me, and because this is a work setting, it's not really appropriate for me to yell back at him. Okay. Implicit, yeah. The hippocampus receives the explicit information, and the amygdala receives the implicit information. Okay. And so the amygdala and the hippocampus, they're the two limbic or midbrain structures that we're interested in. Okay. And the amygdala is our brain's smoke detector or fire alarm. And it tags all the incoming information and determines their emotional significance. And what that tells us is it lets us know if there's an emotional response that's necessary, or if there's an emotionally driven action that needs to immediately be taken. So think fight, flight, or freeze. And our amygdala is always scanning the environment for danger. And as we said earlier, you know, the thalamus sends implicit information to the amygdala. And so it's primarily involved in the processing and storing of implicit information, and it's considered the central junction where information from all of our senses are tied together and given emotional meaning. Okay. And the hippocampus receives the explicit information. Let me go ahead and move this slide forward. Okay, and so it moves a vast amount of data through a series of stages: sensory memory, working memory, long-term memory, and finally cortical consolidation. And we also believe that the hippocampus is primarily the breakdown, is a place where the breakdown happens when there's trauma. And we'll talk more about that later. And it can take a couple months for the hippocampus to move through all of those stages. And what we know about information processing from neurobiology is that REM sleep is really important for this process to happen. REM occurs in the same stage of sleep as dreaming, and it's during this time that scientists believe our brain does a lot of this information processing. And if REM sleep doesn't happen, we're not able to process the emotionally disturbing aspects of our day, and that really impairs us. So some of you...
I'm sorry, did you say it can take up to 2 months is it for an event to be fully processed in the hippocampus? Is that what you were just saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was just asking for clarification if I said if it takes a couple months for a memory to move through the hippocampus. So, okay. So I'm not sure if some of you remember, this is an older study. I can't remember exactly when it happened, maybe sometime in the the 70s or 80s, but they took a group of college kids and for 3 days didn't let them get any REM sleep. And then they just kind of monitored what happened. And so after the first day without any REM sleep, what they noticed was there was this increase in emotionality. After the second day without REM sleep, there was another dramatic increase in this emotionality. And then after 3 days without any REM sleep, some of the participants started having psychotic episodes. So, did you have a question? Okay, all right. Okay, so this is all normal information processing that our brain does for us on a daily basis. And so what happens when there is trauma? So one of the things we also know is that mild arousal is helpful to us. Like if there's a performance, aspect, or we're gonna take a test or, a sporting event, a little bit of anxiety is helpful to us. But if there's too much, extreme arousal disrupts the functioning of these centers in the brain. And one of the first things that happens is our prefrontal cortex goes offline and the amygdala takes over. The other thing that we know is that there is an increase in the release of hormones and neurotransmitters, primarily cortisol and adrenaline. And the hippocampus is very sensitive to those two chemicals, which causes the hippocampus to shut down. And so the processing of the explicit information, that information that gives us information about place and time and context to our experience, doesn't happen. In our implicit memory, the emotional responses, our body sensations, any reflexive actions get stored as fragments, in this raw sensory data. Okay. So this fragmented information, those emotions, body sensations, reflexive actions, those are all typical PTSD symptoms, right? Okay. And so the implicit and explicit information remain separate. And so the information doesn't get appropriately processed. Okay. So the implicit and explicit information get stored separately, and the related contextual information is either missing or offline. The other thing that happens is there's not this normal encoding and linkage to our previously stored knowledge. So learning doesn't occur. Okay. And the way we talk about this in EMDR is what this means is that the implicit information, those body sensations, emotions, they stay frozen over time. And we talk about them as being frozen in our nervous system. And this data stays relatively stable. And what that means is that there are any contradictory experiences we might have don't change that frozen information. And so, I have a client who comes in to see me and she's, very highly traumatized. And doors are part of her trauma. And so she's still really triggered by doors. And so I have a door to my office and then we have a waiting room door. And our waiting room door has a chime on it. So every time she's in my office and she hears that chime, and this happens every time, she flinches. I can see her get afraid, and then she starts to disconnect. And this has consistently happened for 3 years. And so there's nothing about those experiences that, okay, I hear this chime in Trina's office, but nothing bad has happened afterwards. There's nothing about those experiences that help change what's frozen in her nervous system. She's still getting triggered. So, and that ties into the last line up there. This frozen sensory information can get triggered by any stimuli that the brain sees as similar or even thinks might be similar or thinks might be dangerous.
How can you help somebody like that?
We're going to talk about that. Okay. So those triggers could be a sound, it could be a scent, a smell, it could be something that they see. Okay. So let me see where okay. So when the memory is activated, so like for my client, when that memory gets activated, because the explicit information is offline, that sense of self in place and time, there's no context. And so when that stuff gets triggered, the perception is it's happening now. It's not happening 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It's happening right now.